So, Leon Lederman, Director Emeritus of Fermi National Accelerator Lab, Fermilab, Professor of Science at Illinois Institute of Technology in Chicago. And he founded the Illinois Mathematics and Science Academy, which is a great achievement, and I encourage you to go and look at that on the website.
A little louder, please.
A little louder. I encourage you to go and look at that on the website. And there was the, I don't know, 1988 Nobel Prize in Physics. Leon?
Okay, I sort of agree with everybody said in many ways, and so I don't want to add. Lawrence said I should substitute or at least fill in on the things he left out, but he didn't leave much out. I fundamentally want to take a more optimistic point of view, but it doesn't really subtract or diminish the concerns that we've heard here in different ways. Certainly, some of these things we're familiar with. Others, for me, were bad news in many ways. So I'm a physicist, and I was pretty good at it. Takes me 40 minutes to transfer my metals to my pajamas every night. And then in the morning you have to go back. But for some time now, probably a dozen years or more, I've been working in education. And in some sense it's relevant because many of the things we've heard have to do with education. And my concentration in education has been on not on producing more medal-winning physicists or even biologists, but more on producing science-literate graduates of our high schools and colleges. That's an interesting problem, and I'm going to just say a few things about my experiences in this. I first was looking for candles, and so I thought I would tell you about the most brilliant candle probably we have on this planet, which is something called the Large Hadron Collider, LHC. You probably read about it when it was kind of inaugurated and blew up a little bit a few weeks ago. It's being built in the Geneva, French area. It's a huge particle accelerator, and will it's like a new tool. Right now, the laboratory I spend a lot of time at, which is Fermilab, is the largest, most powerful particle accelerator. It's been that way since about 1985. It's made many, many important measurements and some discoveries. And now we're watching with some mixed feelings. You know, mixed feeling is like when your mother-in-law drives off a cliff with your BMW. But this machine in Europe is now a genuine collaboration of, I don't know, 30 countries, and that involves chipping in even the U.S. We did try to build a large machine, a next generation machine, in a place called Texas, I think, some years ago. It was called the Superconducting Supercollider, and it was about 20% complete when the Congress of the United States in 1993 decided that a budget deficit would be intolerable, so it was canceled. And that was a pity because, you know, budget deficits, you know, aren't something we worry about anymore, right? But that machine is now almost functional. They've turned it off because they had a few blow-ups. It's a huge, complicated machine. It will increase essentially the, what's the word, energy, power, number of collisions. If it's a telescope, it would enlarge the view of the world, and it will expose a new part of the world that no one's ever seen, and that's exciting. Remember, Galileo took two lenses and put them in line because he figured out that that would be a good way to look up at the sky and see better things. It was called a telescope. And the telescope he built was something you could buy in Walmarts for $10 maybe. That's the power of it. But in the hands of Galileo, it was a new world he discovered. He discovered the moons of Jupiter, at least 4 of them. He discovered the sunspots and realized that the sun has a spin around an axis. Most important discovery was the fact that that Venus is in orbit around the sun, and that Copernicus was right and Ptolemy was wrong. And that was, just incredible. This whole thing was in, I think, a weekend or so of viewing with this telescope. So it's a tool, and mankind needs tools in order to understand the world in which we live. And so this news of the functioning of this machine in Geneva is a good news because it's a new tool, and we have no idea. We have a lot of, I could regale you with some of the expectations that physicists have to shore up and enlarge and improve our present understanding of the world. That's exciting. On the other hand, many of us also would like to see answers to questions we don't know how to ask. That's the beauty of a machine like that, because it will be a new world. But I don't want to talk about the new machine because it's complicated and gets to be technical, and usually I got to have a blackboard. I don't have a blackboard. It makes me nervous. Not that I want to write on it, but it's nice to be there, So there we go. I want to go back to education. So when I was a director at Fermilab, I found myself meeting postdocs, PhDs in the hall, and pushing them against the wall and teaching them something. Because before I was director of Fermilab, I was a professor at Columbia University, one of these mail-order houses on the East Coast, and I taught, and I enjoyed teaching very much. But here I was now an administrator without a teaching assignment, so I'd find somebody in a hole and teach them something. I felt better about it. And eventually a committee met and decided that I needed help in this issue. And so we started a program at Fermilab of bringing high school kids in. It was called Saturday Morning Physics, and we brought in about 100 high school students every Saturday morning. And I lectured to them for a couple of hours, then they went on tours, and then the postdocs had another meeting and said, it's not fair. You're having all this fun teaching these kids. And it was lighthearted stuff. There was no assignments. Kids volunteered to be there. There were juniors and seniors from schools in the affluent suburbs of Chicago. And we discovered at that time how desperately they were for information on science and how poorly they were served by the high schools in that area. And so we really started to worry about that and spent a fair amount of time and secret DOE money that they never even knew about to improve the ability of these high school kids to enjoy science and make up for the fact that the instructions they were getting were just not up to it. That led me to another activity. So I made an appointment with the governor of Illinois. Governors of Illinois are a curious breed. One prisoner said to his cellmate, the food was better when you were governor. But this governor is okay, he's still around. And he got the idea. What I wanted was to produce a high school, a unique high school. And he gave me some money to have a study. And eventually, after a few months, we had designed a high school which should have been on waterproof paper, because if you read it, you cry. It was so beautiful. And most of the things we thought about actually came into practice. It opened in 1986 as the Illinois Math Science Academy. It's a residential, let me get all the adjectives right, it's a residential public high school for gifted. So we scour the state of Illinois, because it was going to be paid for by the state. And we found, well, first we had to go to experts on how do you find gifted children. That's not easy. And if we listened to them, we would have had probably 91% white males. We didn't like that, so we started innovating on the admissions. And that's a long story, but if you visit that school today, it's now in its 20th, I think the 20th graduation is coming up in June of that school. Incidentally, one of our graduates founded YouTube. Another one wrote Netscape, a large fraction of Netscape. Third one discovered a solar system using gravitational lensing rather than the wobbling of a star. And so on and so on. Our alums are awesome in what they do. And any of you, if you feel depressed, as often I do in reading the newspaper, then you come and visit the school and talk to the young people in the school. There's 600 people. There are 200 in each of 3 years. It's a 3-year school. Kids live in dormitories with counselors. And that taught me something I think very interesting that might have general usefulness. Anyway, the Illinois Math Science Academy is a place I go to and spend a couple of days a week sometimes. I bring in great minds, and many of you are on my list someday of inviting you to come and talk to these students. Very lively group and very articulate, and we now have almost 4,000 alums. That's what happens. And I'm working on, of course, it's not very hopeful these days, but I know I have Senator Obama's interest in generalizing this to have every state should have a school like this. It's not that expensive. We probably, I don't even know the recent costs, but it's probably $6,000 or $7,000 more than the state pays for in Northern Illinois for a high school student, because we are residents, and the residential part is all paid by the state and the counselors, and all those needs are supplied. It's a terrific place. So there are two things about this I want to extend. One has to do with the residential part. It's so amazing as to how much they learn from one another, and to me that's a key for a more general kind of activity, because I've forgotten whether during, before, or after the creation of this school, I moved out of Fermilab and moved into Chicago, went to the University of Chicago and got involved in the Chicago public schools. Somebody who might remember or recall that the Secretary of Education in the Reagan administration, he's actually a pretty good guy, called Chicago the worst school system in the nation. And when he did that, the people in Detroit were very upset. Because all cities suffer. All poor kids in the cities have all the handicaps you can imagine. They wake up, maybe they have family there, maybe it's not there, maybe the parents are working, maybe the grandmother's there. They traverse dangerous streets to come to buildings that badly need repairs. And then they have instructions from teachers who could be far better trained. I got involved in what I thought was the most crying need, and a group of us founded an institution to train primary school teachers, because we found that the teachers that emerge from the teachers' colleges that teach kindergarten through 5th grade, primary school teachers, are about as ignorant of math and science as any group you'll find anywhere, and terrified. And their insecurities are transferred to the kids very quickly, and that's a disaster. So we decided to train those teachers, retrain, And we organized, and turned out it was expensive. We had to get these teachers after school because they were in-service teachers. We tried to influence the teachers' colleges, and we decided that was hopeless. It was just too hard politically to do anything. But the teachers wanted to be better teachers. It's their children in Chicago. So they were quite willing to come after school, come on weekends. We used the summers profitably. Everywhere we could, we got at the teachers. We started stealing curriculum from all sorts of places. The most fruitful place was not far from here, Lawrence Hall of Science, where there's a lot of very good materials. You know, it goes back to Piaget and a physicist who had 6 or 7 children of his own, got very involved in some of these curriculum. These are sort of inquiry, hands-on. It takes a lot of teacher training, and we were patient with the teachers. It took us probably a good 2+ years of 80 or so hours a week teaching both math and science, and the teaching of math and science to these primary school teachers. And after, you know, in Chicago, when you do anything like this, you're working on ethnic eggshells. You're being very careful. And not only that, but when you visit a school, go to the parking lot, you look around the windows, you run for the door. It's a dangerous place in Chicago. It was, and it's getting better now. But these are the schools in the ghetto of Chicago. And we found that after 2 or 3 years, the teachers started to become responsive. Not that they were not responsive. You started to see the effect in these statewide standardized tests. Kids started, whereas we started, I think the IGAP tests are maximum score of 500, and Chicago averages has a score of something like 200, a little more than 200 in Chicago. And these ghetto schools were scoring 30, 40, so you couldn't do them any harm. And we started zooming up in many schools because the teachers got it and the kids got it and so on. So I got very optimistic about this, and it was expensive. I was standing on Michigan Avenue with pencils and raising money for this school. We had philanthropy, and then we got help from the state. The city was marginally helpful. And in fact, the school system in the city was a little hostile because we were doing something they should have been doing. And that was a bit of a problem. But we were spending $6 or $7 million a year, and each year was a problem of raising the money for this. And that's probably why our success, and really the metrics were amazing, because pretty soon a lot of our schools were zooming above the Chicago average. And it would have been wonderful to have enough funds to follow these kids through to see how long this impulse of primary school teaching would go. Okay, that's a kind of a good news thing, and I'm despairing of the fact that there's so little follow-up on this. I'm been pretty active in this political epoch, and I'm optimistic that we'll win and that there'll be a big improvement, I think, in the education of this country. In fact, when I happened to meet my senator before he was a candidate, we had a talk about science education, and then I found in my mail 3 articles that Senator Obama had written on science education over his period of time. He was interested in this. And I know that the wordings that are trickling up in the decision making, of course, everything is now not governance, but campaign. And the campaign is dicey, and our economic situation is bleak. But somehow you have to be optimistic, and I can see a solution to the problem of the poor kids in the school and the famous gap in scores between the average student performance and the poor students, minority students mostly, from the cities. I think this is something we can probably do something about. And so my sort of last comment is, because he's getting nervous, has to do with an idea that I'm trying to sell to the city of Chicago, and that is to generate a school or a couple of schools in Chicago, in the city, that would be residential schools, like the schools these gifted kids have, and to put in counselors and to let these kids talk to each other. Because from the education literature, and a very eloquent article on why they fail, written by actually a mathematician. His name was Yuri Treisman. He's in Texas now, but he was at Berkeley, and he segregated the minority kids into kids whose parents were wealthy and poor, parents were educated and not educated, and he found that the usual excuses for why children fail didn't work. And then he began to realize this was a cultural thing, and started to think about how they behave. You know, if class has an assignment, the white kids say, "Okay, guys, we'll meet in my house and we'll work on the problems," and they'll collaborate, talk to each other. That was not the way minority kids handled it. He transferred these ideas into the math department at University of Texas in Austin, and raised the number of math majors from 3 or 4 per year to something like 100 using this idea. So I thought we could try this communication, this encouraging kids to talk to each other, because if you're a teacher in a classroom and you get kids to yell at each other and argue, then you got something. They're yelling about physics. We invented a device called a clicker, thousands of them now being made, in which you interrupt the lecture with a multiple choice question. I'm probably a world's expert on multiple choice questions. And the kids answer the question, and then there's a computer that gives you the distribution of answers, and you say, "I don't like these answers. Why don't you talk to your neighbors, and then I'll give you the same test again in another minute or two." And then you hear this shouting and yelling and talking, and they're getting used to talking to each other about the scientific issue. Does the ball stay there before it starts coming down, and so on and so on. Questions like that. So I'm enthusiastic about the notion of an interesting experiment of trying to see if residential schools in the cities will help a lot. Of course, it's more expensive, but I always now rate when it comes to education, where we say, teachers need more salary. Of course, we have to raise teachers' salary. We have to improve the teachers. There's a lot of things to do. In fact, I was a co-chair of a national commission not long ago, and so I sat down and read all the reports written since 1983. In 1983, there was a nation at risk, and since then, there were some 30 reports written, commissions and workshops and roundtables and so on. And they all got it right. Everybody knows what to do to fix education, variations and so on, but it's not that difficult. What we have is a massive failure to implement all the good ideas. We don't implement. So we have a special basement in Washington where they put these reports, a lot of space on the shelf for more reports, and it's useless because unless you can get a dedication to implementation, it's not going to work. It's a little bit like the Sputnik business, which that's been appealed to here too. Sputnik was a crisis of such severity that within a year we created NASA, we created DARPA, we had funding for teachers' salaries by the federal government. All kinds of things happened in that 1 year because it was an important issue. Today we don't have a Sputnik, but we have a global warming. That's good. That's dangerous. So is that my last story is that I had a friend in TV, Peter Jennings. He died, unfortunately, but I asked him, I kept asking him, why don't you do something on global warming? This was 10 years ago. It's well known, as we learned. And he said, that's boring. It's too long-term. I said, no, it's not long-term. You could subtitle it, Teach Your Grandchildren to Swim. Well, he liked that idea, and I'm sure he was, if he didn't go away in an untimely way, we might have had a good TV program on that subject. Okay, I think I'm finished rambling.